Hey everybody, happy Monday. I wanted to take a minute to address a very common question that I've been getting, typically from people who have been in their program for a while and want to know a little bit more details about how they can be progressing and be more involved and having better understanding of what weights to use, so on and so forth. And I say that because typically in the beginning of a program, we're more worried about understanding the language of exercise and how to move and programming those patterns into your brain, just to make sure that over time you can actually lift heavier, lift faster, while having those kind of connections ironed out. So here's the thing. When you're lifting weights, there's a certain amount of requirements that you have to be conscious of. So number one, we have to address the golden rule of weightlifting, and this essentially applies to the broad array of people that Satellite Fitness services. Lift as heavy as possible with the best form you can. So we say that because the goal, primarily for most people to get a good strength response or to get a good stimulus from what we're trying to do, you want to make sure that you're lifting tough weights, that you're doing work, so to speak. But we also need to throw in there the piece about perfect form or good form or as close to perfect as you can, so that we stay safe and that we don't create muscle imbalances by having sloppy form all the time. I'll get to in a minute why it is actually important sometimes to let form go just a little bit, a certain percentage of the time that you spend lifting weights. So that's the golden rule. No matter what you're doing, no matter what the prescription is, you want to lift as heavy as possible, and you want to do it with perfect form. But we should lift as heavy as possible according to several things. Number one, the tempo. And we all know what the tempo is. I've gone into detail on that on other videos. But the tempo is very important. Watch the other videos to understand why. But you'll lift as heavy as possible as long as you can sustain the tempo throughout all the sets and all the repetitions that you're doing for your exercise. The reasons for that, of course, are going to be primarily safety, control, but also it really depends on what we're trying to do. We're trying to be under tension, under load for 20 seconds or 1 minute. So you have to be able to stay within the tempo that's designated. That's really important. Another reason we want to do that, we want to lift as heavy as possible, but still be able to hit the required amount of reps that's being prescribed. So you might be lifting as heavy as possible, but I've told you to do 10 reps and you can only do 5. So that's too heavy. You want to make sure you're hitting that tempo, and you want to make sure that you are lifting within the appropriate rep range. And we'll go over the rep range in just a moment. Again, you want this to be challenging. You want it to be difficult. So let's say that I give you 12 repetitions. You really want that 10th, 11th, and 12th rep to be pretty tough. And then depending on the amount of rest that I'm giving you, you want to lift as heavy as possible, but you need the rest that you're supposed to be taking to properly recover you for the next set. So if you go too heavy, you'll know you've gone too heavy if you rest 2 minutes and then you can't complete the exercise on the subsequent sets. That means maybe you went a little too heavy, there's not enough recovery. That's a discussion we would need to have so we can understand what weight might have been a little bit more appropriate for you. Getting back to rep range for a second. Pen. So a lot of times in your progressions, you'll see a rep range, meaning I'll say I want you to do between 8 and 10 repetitions. Well, why do I do that? It's not that so if you're feeling crappy on that day, you can just stick with the lower rep range. It's so that you understand those are you can do 8, 9, or 10 reps, and those are the reps that I'm asking you to do. So here's how to kind of properly utilize a rep range. Let's say I do a dumbbell bench press at 55 pounds, and I decide that I could do all 10 of those reps. It was pretty tough, but I was able to do all 10. Well, if you're able to do all 10, then I would expect you to go up in weight during the next set. And maybe you'll do 9 reps. You're able to complete, let's just say you bumped up to 60 pounds, you're able to do 9. Well, if you got 9 reps, I would maybe encourage you to go a bit heavier on your last set, and maybe you bumped up to 65, 70 pounds and you were able to do 8 reps. As opposed to just doing the lower rep scheme at a weight where you get to the 8th rep and you're like, I could have banged out 5 more of those. That means the weight probably wasn't heavy enough. So ideally, you're doing the most weight that you can and doing the most reps that you can. But if you're doing the maximum amount of reps within the rep range, then you should probably think about going a little bit heavier. Another piece that's probably important to discuss is making sure that you've warmed up the exercise adequately. So let's say you have 3 sets and you're doing a dumbbell bench press and you do your first set, you bang out 10 reps and it's really easy. I wouldn't count that as your first set. All 3 sets should be pretty tough. So you've got to kind of warm up, and you don't have to do, sets of 10 with each dumbbell weight and trying to figure out which one's the good weight for you to use. You just have to do like maybe 2 to 3 reps. So you got to kind of use your brain a little bit and think, all right, I could probably do 10 reps with that. And if you fall short of the 10, it's okay. You could do 8 or 9, and then you can make judgments on your weight as you go. So that's what the rep range is really there for. Typically, for people who are just starting out, they'll have kind of a wider rep range, between 10 and 15 or 12 and 15, so on and so forth. And then just so you understand how basic progression will work and how you can tell you're progressing week to week, let's see. I'll give you something really easy. Let's just say we're doing like a 4-week cycle of just getting stronger. It's kind of bodybuilding, leaning out, that kind of thing. Week 1, I have you doing on Monday, let's say we're doing dumbbell bench press again, 20 repetitions. The following week, I have you doing 3 sets of 20 on the first week. Next week, it's 3 sets of 15. Next week, it's 3 sets of 12. The next week, it's 3 sets of 10. So obviously, you're going from a really high rep range to kind of moderate to relatively low relative to where we started. So what you'll want to know is that for each of these sets on the first week, on your 3x20, you hit all the things we were talking about. It's heavy, it's challenging, but you used good form, you adhered to the tempo, so on and so forth. But the next week, we're going to get stronger because we're going to use heavier weights because we're doing less repetitions, right? It just makes sense. So let's say we get all the way down to the 4th week where we've done 10 repetitions for that dumbbell bench press, and we're using obviously a lot heavier weight than we did for the 20. Now, we'll probably take a recovery week after that week 4, but then we'll start this program again, and we'll do 20 repetitions on that week 1, but we'll use weight that was a little bit heavier than the week 1 of the first phase of that. So that's just kind of a really basic idea of how you'll progressively overload, and that's just a fancy term for saying you're making strength gains. That's all that really means. So that's a good way that you can gauge whether you're getting stronger or not. And that's obviously my job to recognize that within your programming. But for people who want to know and recognize, how that works within their own body, well, that's an easy way to look at it. If I go through this cycle again, am I using heavier weights than I did the first time? And if you are, great, you're getting stronger. Another thing I wanted to kind of discuss is when it's okay to lose your form a little bit. So 90% of the time, you should be, your goal should be to strive for really good form. That's what you want to do. But in order to get strong, you're going to have to let go of some of that form sometimes, just to sacrifice it to make better strength gains. So let's just think we're doing that between 8 and 10 repetitions of our dumbbell bench press. When it gets to the 9th or the 10th rep, maybe it's like your 2nd and 3rd set, you're a little bit tired. If you have to let your form go and you got to really struggle to kind of get those guys up and maybe your arms move out to the sides just a little bit as you're struggling to get the weight up, that is okay. As long as each rep isn't just a shit show, then it's okay. But the last couple of reps, if you're just kind of really struggling to kind of get those out, that's work. You're doing hard work.